Hello, Pittsburgh. I'm Zach Gibson, and this is Triblive's From the Newsroom podcast, bringing you top stories from Triblive.com. Since 1970, fire departments in Pennsylvania have seen a 90% decrease in volunteer firefighters. There are roughly 38,000 in the state today. With the modern era's time constraints, lack of shift work opportunities, and busier social schedules, there is a prolonged volunteer drought. Fire companies are struggling, and now many of them are facing the same tough decision: merge and consolidate or risk closure. Here to tell us about the complex situations within this increasingly urgent crisis is Triblive reporter Haley Daugherty. Hi, Haley.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, let's talk about fire regionalization in this story that you wrote. Give us some background on your process reporting on this topic, and while we're focusing on one specific article, I know that this isn't the first you've written on fire regionalization, so tell me about fire regionalization and your coverage experience.
Yeah, so my coworker, Tanya Paniz, me and her worked on this article together. We both have had experience and background working on stories about fire departments, volunteer merging. So she was like, why don't we combine, make a dynamic duo, and kind of do a really rounded out story about how merging kind of is on the table for departments, how that kind of becomes an option, and what they kind of have to do to get to that merging point. And then on the other side of things, what happens after that merge is completed.
Okay. So, what did you and Tanya set out to find when beginning this article?
We definitely we wanted to kind of encompass the entire process. So we wanted to talk to departments that were kind of looking into solutions for sort of the lack of funding that is so widespread across southwestern PA for volunteer fire companies, the lack of manpower and how they're kind of dealing with that and trying to get more volunteers. And then we wanted to show the advantages of merging, because you hear the word regionalization and not a lot of people know what that all entails. It's just kind of like, oh, it's a group of firefighters talking about fighting fires together, but that's not really all that it is. There's a lot of different backgrounds and mechanics that go into combining a firehouse. So we just wanted to kind of be able to encapsulate, and we wanted to get those firsthand experiences in this article.
Okay, so let's get into this story. Now, there are almost 2,500 fire companies in Pennsylvania, according to a report from the State House Republican Caucus. Now, about 90% of those are volunteer services. So let's talk about the previous state of the fire company system. Can you introduce us to Sam Boak, who says he remembers what the job looked like back in the 90s?
My coworker, Tanya, she was the one who spoke one-on-one with Sam, but he really started off the interview kind of reminiscing on how the job looked in the 90s, how you could walk in and you could show up any time of day and there would be people in the firehouse. Whereas if you were to walk into that same firehouse before it was regionalized, you would walk in and it would be empty. And people would have to be contacted personally outside of that firehouse to kind of get to the firehouse, get dressed, and then go to whatever emergency call they were on. So he definitely came from that generation of firefighters where the firehouse was kind of the center of the party in the town. It was something that was revered rather than something that kind of almost resembles a ghost town when you pull up in the middle of the day.
Okay. Now, through one of his quotes, he says, you could show up anytime and there would be 6 guys there sitting there having a good time, even pointing to your point as the culture of what the firehouse looked like starting to change. Now, Sam was part of the merger with the Harmer Fire Company, yes?
Yes, so he was originally part of the Harmer Volunteer Fire Company. He was a part of the merger with Springdale Township in 2012, and they got rid of both names altogether and created the Allegheny Valley Volunteer Fire Company. And then in 2022, they brought Cheswick in as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, according to the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute, it's estimated that only 38,000 volunteer firefighters remain in the state. Now, that's about 100,000 down since 1990. With a 62,000 volunteer drop in the last 30 years, now more than ever, fire companies need to make a change to maintain their operations. Enter the concept of mergers. Your story details the merger that led to the Youngstown-Whitney Fire Department. Can you tell us about their merging process?
I spoke to Chief Sean Reagan. He has been, I want to say, the chief since January, and he was pretty much all for the merger, because one thing that I really appreciated about speaking with him for this story, he was very passionate about the merger and seeing his fire company survive, you know, and he really took it to heart, which I really appreciated it. I always love talking to a passionate source. So yeah, he said that generally most departments are struggling for manpower and struggling for funding. So the Youngstown-Whitney Department is a regionalized department that merged the Youngstown Fire Department and the Whitney Hostetter Department in unity in 2021. This didn't just kind of happen overnight. Reagan said that the conversations took, I want to say, around 3.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then it was a lot of drafting the charter agreement and then chit-chatting, seeing who was actually going to be on board with this. Once it came time for supervisors and council members to vote and say, hey, we want to do this. Once that was decided on, the actual merging process, of course, happened right when COVID hit. So a little over 2 years because of COVID, but he said that normally maybe a year and a half would be what it takes to do a very serious high-speed merging process. He said that so far it's working out. It's working out pretty good. Yeah, he said that they only got a handful of members just because they were both departments were kind of really low, but they did get some duplicates and equipment, so they were able to sell that off and get that jump in funding in their budget. And he said that so far everyone is just happy that they are still able to operate in a first responder capacity.
You brought up a temporary bump in funding. So let's add some financial context. A hearing from the State House Republican Caucus last year showed that volunteer fire department budgets can top $2 million a year, which caught me off guard. I didn't realize it was so high. And what's even more shocking to me is that most of that money is earmarked for things like mortgages on the fire stations and payments on trucks and other vehicles and insurance premiums. That only leaves a small amount to actually run the departments. And in your story, you tell us that the cost to equip one firefighter, according to the caucus report, is about $28,000. Money from host municipalities and various fundraisers barely cover the operating expenses for most fire companies. Now, this is something that I think your average person wouldn't generally think about, the allocation of the money that it takes to recruit volunteers and to actually suit them, have them all situated to go out and perform the job that they're volunteering to do. I think a lot of people would just see that $2 million a year and think, that's a lot of money. Where is that supposed to come from? Sam, in experiencing his own merger, said that it was one of the best things to happen, specifically for this reason.
Because the Allegheny Valley Volunteer Fire Company took on multiple sort of departments, they definitely have a wider pool of volunteers. Granted, that volunteer pool is not nearly as large as it was in the 90s, but it's still bigger than what they were working with beforehand. And like he said, that we're not spending money on duplicate services. We have more manpower and grants come more easily. So the grants part, a lot of times when they are separate fire companies, they are all competing for that same limited funding. So it's a lot of, okay, they get that. That's great. That volunteer company gets money, but what about us?
Yeah.
You know, now what do we do? Where do we fill that hole that we were counting on that grant? And of course, it's not very common that fire companies are counting on grants. They're used to not being able to have that funding within arm's reach, they're not saying, oh, we're definitely going to get this grant, so we'll do that. They're not doing that at all. That's not what I want people to take from this. But they're also, with mergers, they don't have to compete with each other anymore. Now they can all work together and say, like, what is the best way that we can get this funding? And that's also another huge benefit. And Boak seems very optimistic. He says we're getting bigger and better. And he said, I would encourage any department to do their due diligence and consider merging. So it seems like it's working out for Allegheny Valley as well.
Okay. Well, speaking of growing and getting bigger, let's talk about recruiting volunteers. At the top of the episode, I mentioned that changing demographics, work habits, and social calendars have created this drought that we are dealing with. And the result is a delayed response or insufficient, according to the Pennsylvania Fire and Emergency Services Institute. It appears that mergers are a good tool when necessary to aid in continuing a fire company's service, but many agencies aren't actively jumping on board.
Yeah, so the Department of Community and Economic Development is working on consolidation studies, but only with about 40 local departments.
Okay, why not more?
Well, those departments or those communities actively have to say, like, hey, we want to participate in that study and we want to be able to see what we can do. And some communities, unfortunately, one, they might not know that it's an option for them. And two, some may just say, okay, well, we're not interested right now. And what kind of became a trend in the interviews when I asked the same question of, hey, why isn't everyone looking into merging if it is this, granted, a short-term solution, but a solution nonetheless for what they're struggling with right now? A lot of the answers were that there can be a lot of pride involved in the firefighting arenas. Like, when you pull up, you're running into a burning building, you want the name of your department on your back.
Right.
And that is completely valid. But a point that someone that was interviewed made, he said that at that point, nobody really cares. Their house is burning down. This is the worst day of their lives. They want a trained professional to reach the scene in a good amount of time. And they don't care what name is on the side of the truck until later, when they make their social media post that says, thank you so much. But that was a really interesting point that was made. I was very surprised to hear that some factors is saying, well, I don't want our name to disappear. I don't want our name to be edited or changed. Like, this is us. This is my community. This is my community's firehouse. And I mean, granted, those feelings are valid, but I thought it was interesting kind of how powerful they can be with the process of thinking about merging.
Like you said, merging is a short-term solution to a problem that's been going on for a very long time. So is merging addressing the real issue? There's still a volunteer drought.
Yeah, so volunteers are actually estimated to save municipalities in Pennsylvania about $10 billion a year in salaries and benefit expenses, and the lack thereof has been almost deemed a public health crisis. It's definitely worrisome, just the amount of, like, the percentage of drop, just the statistics and how quickly those numbers dropped is absolutely a crisis.
Okay. Now, the summit host chief, Josh Fox, says that changing times has made the recruiting harder. And this was something that I thought was interesting while reading your story. Back to a little bit of what Sam said, the culture around the firehouse is different, and that is also a contributing factor.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chief Fox has been a volunteer member for about 23 years. And he does make that point that the family dynamic has kind of evolved and made the time, like, when fire halls were the center of small towns, a thing of the past. And Reagan really echoed that. I mean, we didn't interview them together, but they were separate. But yeah, he said pretty much the same thing. To directly quote Chief Reagan, he said, you don't have that small town atmosphere anymore. There's nothing really to blame for it, but times have changed. Society just progressed, so people don't have time to do it. Volunteer firefighting is not a hobby. It requires a good deal of training and commitment. One thing that Reagan kind of pointed out that I thought was really interesting, he said that families are two-income households. Sports that students and children play, they went from lasting 3 months during the school year to all year round with club teams, travel teams. So now one parent is rushing home from work to take their kid to practice, and the other parent is going home to make the other kid dinner,
Right.
There just really isn't a ton of time for them to be in a firehouse waiting for a call.
Mm-hmm. With all of these different factors contributing to this drought, what can be done to attract more volunteers?
Not for lack of trying. Like, volunteer firehouses all over the state have done a lot to try to make volunteering easier, more possible, more attractive to potential volunteers. And granted, they can only make it so easy. You need to be trained. You need to have that time commitment. You are putting your life on the line to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And as a volunteer, that can definitely be very intimidating. But one example is advocates for the volunteer firefighting arena. They have called on the state to offer more tax credits, education credits, and just like some other incentives to attract volunteers. State Senator Lindsey Williams, I mean, she said that she kind of felt incentives could be better. So she isn't really quite sure it's being handled in the right way. Again, my coworker, Tanya, was able to talk to Senator Williams, and I thought the things she had to say were extremely interesting. To directly quote her, she said the state definitely needs to both incentivize and provide more logistical support than we currently do. In an ideal world, the state should pay people directly for their efforts, not make them jump through tax credit hoops that may or may not help them.
Senator Williams mentions tax credit hoops. For some of our listeners who aren't as familiar, can you explain a little bit of what it's like for a volunteer firefighter when receiving those benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. So each municipality can pass their own tax credits and kind of make their own stipulations or requirements that a volunteer firefighter would have to meet to get those credits. So in 2021, Aspinwall was discussing a special tax credit for fire and EMS volunteers that would take off up to $300 from their earned income tax or cut about 20% from those property taxes. And then in that same year, the Shaler commissioners also expanded their tax assistance by offering a property tax credit to department retirees. So there definitely are benefits there, and they have been sort of edited to fit that community and their demographic the best that it could. But I know Williams, she ended up telling Tanya that she thinks the state should be offering one rather than leaving it up to municipalities. She doesn't want to take that option away from municipalities, but there should be that little extra support from the state if it would be possible.
Just looking at the numbers continuing to decrease currently, it seems like these incentives just from the municipalities aren't getting the job done as well as they would have liked. Okay. Anthony Kovacic, chief of the Hempfield Volunteer Fire Department, is all ears on merger talks because of this lack of being able to find volunteers. Before we close, can you tell me a little bit about him and why he is so interested in the concept of a merger?
Kovacic said that his department was approached by the New Stanton Fire Station in August of this year to join in a state-led study with kind of neighboring municipalities. So New Stanton and Youngwood and the Hempfield departments would all be included to kind of see how these departments can include or can improve those fire services. So the study would kind of look at it from all angles. And one thing that he kind of said that he was hoping for would be trying to find volunteers and how to attract those volunteers. He said that one of his quotes, he said, trying to find volunteers is very difficult in the service right now. It's been declining for quite a while now. So he kind of made the point that, hey, if someone can come in and say, this is what you need to do to get a few more bodies in here, he wants to know. Like, he wants to know the secret. He wants to know how to do it. And he said that he doesn't know what the study is going to lead to. He can't guarantee a merger. He can't guarantee that once they get this study results in, he can't guarantee what will happen or what his department's actions or other departments' actions will be. But he's definitely hoping that it can give them some options on how to help numbers and funding and everything.
Well, Haley, Thank you for coming on to help explain the urgency and the complexity of fire regionalization in Western Pennsylvania.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zach Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.